flee, i.e. there's still an enemy. He's just in a state of scattering and fleeing. This is where we left off. So we're going to take it from inside, going in Os Test 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 lines. 8 lines from the top. It says by Inyan Hu. You see that? By Inyan Hu, whenever you're doing a refinement, which is so to speak from above to below. What does it mean from above to below? Which it means the higher one does not entirely encloak itself into the category of the lower one, right? That's what it means from the refiner is sort of in some way just shining light on the thing being refined. He's not crawling into it like we say during davening and during, living your life, eating and drinking and sleeping and sort of like being involved deeply in the Nefesh Bahamis. No, it's more like learning Nigla, right? Where you basically are dealing with the world, but in a way where you're not actually going into the world. You're just talking about it in a Torah format, right? This, as we said before, was a metaphor for the ark traveling in the desert. On one hand, it went into the land of the enemy, which means it was in the realm of worldliness, but it didn't actually fight with the world. It just shined the aron, and the world was automatically refined. So this is still called above to below, because you're not encloaking yourself in the realm of the lower ones. So whenever this is going to happen, then the refinement of the lower one is coming strictly because of a light shining upon it from the higher one. It's the reason why the opponent is not opposing anymore, but rather he's in a state of fleeing and running away, so forth. It's not because of his own sensibilities. It's not because of his own will, his own intellect, his own emotion. He remains basically in a state of opposition. So why is he not opposing you? Because you're shining a light on him, which is basically nullifying him, but it's not changing him to becoming aligned with your will, aligned with your intellect. So he still ultimately has his own will, a differing intellect. He's still an opponent. It's just you're bringing so much light that he is, so to speak, nullified. On the contrary, because you are shining a light upon him, which is totally beyond his level, so it's not that he transforms his private existence to be in alignment with you. On the contrary, it's just totally nullified. You're bringing something, so to speak, infinite to a finite being. He's not suddenly like understanding the sensibilities of an infinite being. He's just not able to express himself at all. He goes to a state of total nullity. But if he would exist, he would be opposed to you still. It's just that you're not giving him room for existence because you're shining a light which defies his existence. Right? But you haven't actually changed him, and therefore, if he would exist, and he still does in potential, he's what you're called your scattered enemy, your fleeing enemy, right? Now, that together with the fact that he's shining light upon you, right, and he's not encloaking himself into you. So that's one, so to speak, disadvantage of the total nullity of this enemy, right? Is that you're not encloaking yourself into him, you're just shining upon him, so you're not getting into his kishkas, right? The other disadvantage is now we're talking about not the Penimius Torah, right? We're not talking about King Solomon's level, we're talking about Moshe's level in the desert, which goes on Nigla of Torah, when the refinement hu ba'ofen she'elyon ha'mavar is done in such a way where the refiner he's coming into the place of the refined one, right? The thing that's being refined. Like in this case, the ark is going into the desert, or in the case of Torah, you're speaking about the world. This is a sign that he's not, even though he's called the higher one, he's not the higher one in such a highfalutin way that he has no connection or recognition of the lower one. He's not that high. What's the proof? The fact that he's going into the enemy's land means he recognizes, considers this opponent as something somewhat formidable, right? It's at least in his mind, he recognizes its own existence. Right. And this therefore is the reason for what I was calling before the second disadvantage. Because he's not coming from such an incomparable level Therefore, even though he's shining light from above and it has the power to nullify his enemy, right? It doesn't have the power to nullify him entirely. Why? Because we just got through said, he himself is responsible for keeping this enemy's existence in place because he recognizes the existence of the enemy. He even considers him formidable enough to actually have to travel into his place. So while he's busy shining a light to nullify him, that light cannot be sufficiently strong to nullify him completely out of existence when the one who's shining the light is actually recognizing and therefore keeping in existence the thing he's trying to nullify. So you have two, so to speak, downsides with this level of birur. One is that it's so to speak too high, that it doesn't go down into the kishkas of the enemy and start to actually convince him to have a different will, convince him to have a different understanding, convince his emotions to go according to it, because he stays aloof, right? He goes into the desert, but he doesn't go into the snake, right? He just nullifies the snake from above. So on one hand, he's not low enough to actually convince and transform. On the other hand, he's not high enough to bring a light which is so completely incomparable that the lower one is as though it doesn't exist. And he brings a light which is so infinite that it negates the very existence of the thing he's trying to, his opponent. Why is he not high enough? Because as we said, he's already going into the land of the enemy, which represents high in the higher realms, a level of light which recognizes the existence of creation. If it's a light which is, so to speak, so low in Hashem that it's recognizing the existence of creation, it cannot therefore also completely negate and nullify out of existence the creation itself. It's responsible for keeping it in place. What it can do is tell the creation to chill, right? It's like, I can't completely change your mind because I'm not encloaking into you, but I'm relatively infinite compared to you, and therefore when I come in place of you, you will certainly, your snakes will go at bay, and your mountains will melt, and flowers will grow in the desert. In other words, it has the ability to like, so to speak, negate the expression of the enemy entirely, but not to negate his existence entirely. Only his expression. Therefore, it's called an enemy in flight, a fleeing enemy. Still an enemy, but in a state of vayafutsu, vayanusu. You getting this?
It's like Soviet Colombian, that light that you're talking about, slash access to the world.
It has shaykhis, but it's above the world, right?
Yeah,
you could say that's bidyuk Soviet Colombian, right? Or Kesser, like the lower level of Kesser. Or even, we're basically saying it's something connected with the lower level of the Kesser. Yeah, did you have a question from before?
I was gonna say, like, what's this, what is the Rebbe trying to do, like, explain, how is this, I want to understand,
I also want to understand, man, you gotta say it though.
Yeah, I know.
Spit it out.
I don't understand so much right now, as much as, because so far I understand he's talking in this mimer, like part of Bshalom. So I'm trying to say, how does he have to like do with this part of Bshalom thing?
You want to know how we're going back to the beginning of the mimer? So basically what we're saying is, we're trying to understand how Chassidus is connected with that pasuk.
Yeah.
Since that was the pasuk the Alter Rebbe was saying, right?
Yeah.
Then we went into this idea that there's something called a chassid. So we're trying to understand Chassidus. We went into the concept of a chassid. And if you remember, we talked about the level that a chassid can bring down, right? Yeah. And so in the midst of all that, we started talking about the levels of infinite light, whether it's tzedakah or chesed or even higher than chesed, because gemulus chasadim can give to rich and poor alike, right? We had this whole conversation. Then we started to explain that, so now we're understanding what Chassidus is, what a chassid is. Now we understand what shalom is, right, ultimately, because if we're understanding the pasuk, Pada Bshalom Nafshi, what is shalom, right? Yeah. That his soul was redeemed in peace. This is connected to Chassidus, the level of a chassid and shalom are connected, right? So we're starting to explain what's a birur of the world. How do you refine the world? By way of war. And how do you refine the world? By way of peace. And we understood that there's war. There's something kind of in the middle of peace and war, which is the idea of the Aaron going through the desert, and there's pure peace, which is Shalom, Shlomo HaMelech, Shalom Shalom. He was the need of peace. So and we're seeing that each one of these levels brings down a different level of light in order to refine the world. So you see how it all goes together. He's explaining what Chassidus ultimately is enabling a peaceful way of refining the world, and that's maybe why the Alter Rebbe was released from jail peacefully. We'll see about that, but that's like the flow of the mimer. Yeah.
So all along I've been stuck with this question about how did it all fall apart after Shlomo HaMelech? So is your Boam, and is it because that this was a piece from the intellect, from the wisdom, and but it wasn't a piece through Hasidus. But somehow the kingdoms were separated, and that wasn't, because I was wondering why wasn't there Hishtalkos? After Shlomo HaMelech, a lot of times they'll say that a tzaddik is even more powerful, even more involved after his death. So why didn't that happen? Why instead did the kingdom split?
It's not to say that it didn't happen. It's just that what we're saying right now is that Shlomo, do you remember what level we're holding on over here? Shlomo Melech brought what? Not tzedakah, right? Because the 5 levels that were missing from creation, if they should come back, it's called tzedakah. We said he was called Ashirus, remember? He's called wealth because he brought something that the world never seen before, a source which existed before the world. And therefore, when the world came into possession of it, it wasn't called gaining its lack, it was called wealth because it never saw such a thing, right? But if you remember, we said there's a level beyond that. The first one was Arich, the second one, Shlomo's level, was Atik, and then we started to discuss this idea of Panemius Atik, i.e. something that can give both to poor and rich. If you can give to the rich, it means the whole level of Shlomo could also receive something. Not receive because it had a lack. If it was receiving because it had a lack, it would not be called rich. Rich to the fullest measure of rich, and yet there's even something beyond that which can be given to it. So what is that? Basically, we're going to call that like eternality. You could be rich, but your riches could theoretically go away. So that's what happened to Shlomo. In other words, he reached a level which was messianic in a sense, because the revelation of that level of wealth into the world, which does not belong in this world, is a messianic thing. But the very fact that it could come and go means that he didn't access some one level higher, which makes that an eternal part of the creation. And so his fall was actually histalkus. It was a continuation and a furtherance of elevation, because there's only going up, right? That's the idea that Jews just go up, right? We don't Ma'alim b'kodesh ve'in moridin. There's only up in the creation and everything. So, but sometimes it's a yerida l'tzurach aliyah. So in order to gain that level of eternality, we had to go through what we went through in order to basically put it back together again. Like we learned from the beginning, like the tikkun of the tohu comes from a higher place than even the tohu itself. Right? So in other words, the rectification of something broken, right, is possible only because something even higher. So he brought the light. It had to break in order for us to basically put it back together again and make it permanent, which is the messianic light. Anyway, that's in a nutshell why the kingdom split. Who split the kingdom? Yeravam ben Navat. Who was the prophet that told him to do it?
The Bshalom, his teacher.
Achi Ashiloni. So he's mamash a prophet in the Tanakh. He comes and he tells Yeravam to split the kingdom. From that point until all of Jewish history, the kingdom is split. This guy suddenly comes back and he becomes the teacher of the Baal Shem Tov.
Why is he telling?
And he comes and he's the teacher of the Baal Shem Tov, right? This is who gave us Chassidus, because he who broke it is also coming to fix it and bringing this Torah Shalom into the world, which basically explains why there was a split, and it rectifies the whole break from its inception, literally. Right? Chassidus is the response.
So Hasidus is what was missing.
Chassidus is what had to be born out of that whole break.
Wait, why was there even a break in the kingdom?
There just was. What do you mean? Why?
There was is it between Judah and
two kingdoms arose.
Why did he break it up? Why did he make them two? Why didn't he just leave them as one?
Right.
Destiny.
Yeah, we're gonna. It's. I mean, we've been saying it the whole time, right? When you create unity out of plurality, it's a greater unity than a unity which never faced plurality. In other words, when your enemies join you, it's a greater level of an eternal level of peace than should you never have any enemies to begin with. Why? Because if you never have enemies to begin with, everything is one. There always is this lurking wonder, what if there would be an enemy? Maybe he'd come against me. Like your singularity is always, to some degree, subject to question if it's never been challenged. Once it's been challenged, which looks bad, it's a Eureka. Oh, why are you splitting it into two? Because when the two will also recognize that they're one, now your unity is bulletproof. That's what I was trying to say before. It's eternal. Because the concept of splitting it up has already happened and been resolved. There's nowhere else to go with this. It's all one. And therefore, it's actually a necessity to split it into two. That's actually why Hashem made the world, to be honest with you. The world itself is that split into two. And Hashem himself is a perfect unity. And he's like, but what if I wasn't? So here, I won't be. And then the whole world will come and bow down to my unity. It's even a stronger unity. In other words, it's like, it's a Yerida L'Tzorech Aliyah.
Rafi, if Tefillah is like going out to war,
Right.
and then Nigla is like learning about the world, but like you're peacifying it through like learning about it. You're taking territory, but you're not physically having to go out. What's Nista like then? Like
It's King Solomon. You sit in your place, and the world comes to you. You don't even talk about the world. When you're finding the world that level in Nister, your Torah learning is about angels and spheros and tzimtzum and ak and all these things. You're not talking about chickens and Reuven and Shimon's ox. So you're not talking about the world at all. The world does not take any place in your mind. It doesn't exist. And because the world doesn't even exist in your conversation, that is the only way to truly negate the existence of the world. If you're talking about a world, there's only so much you can negate it. As much as it is in its source in Torah, but it's still there. When you're talking about Spheros and Ein Sof, the world, you're talking about divinity at a level where the world has not even begun to exist. Hashem hasn't even thought about it. That's like King Solomon bringing this level of wealth, which is completely beyond the world. Therefore, you can shine such a deep light onto it that it's a light which is completely beyond its existence, and therefore you're not like simultaneously holding on to its existence, right? Like we said before, like if you're thinking of the world, you can't negate it all the way because you're the one keeping it in existence by holding on to it. Well, if you're not thinking about the world, you're talking about something else, then the negation of the world is total and complete because it doesn't. You're not keeping it in existence by even recognizing its existence, and that's like the level of Shlomo. All right, moving on inside. Stop. All right, 3 lines up. Kevan shegam birur zehu b'derech milamay lamata v'lo b'derech hislavshus. We're going back to the refinement of the ark. Since this refinement is from one negative is that it's from above to below, right? It doesn't go in cloaking inside of the category of the lower one. And the bittul that it brings from above to below is not a total bittul because it still has the world in mind. It's like nigla. How much can you negate the world if you're busy talking about it? Therefore, even after the job was done with the ark and it's nullifying the snakes and everything, the existence of the opponent is still there in a concealed way. There is still such a thing as called oivecha, misonecha, right? There's your enemies still exist. Elisha mekom mekom. She said, nonetheless, since the lower world is also incomparable even to this limited level of revelation that it's getting. In other words, we're saying that when Hashem shines from above to below and he still has the world in mind, it's still a level of the world which is from the Kesser, from the lower part of the Kesser, which is like a Sovev light, which is still completely beyond any finite aspect of the world. So therefore, it still has the power, even though it has the world in mind, and it's a level of light which recognizes the existence of the world, it's still incomparably infinite to the world, and therefore it still does a huge bittul and nullification on the world, just not total and complete. That's what we said. Nevertheless, since the lower one is still not in any way comparable even to this limited measure of revelation from the higher one, then at the very least, what gets nullified in the lower one? It's strength. It's like chutzpah. It's gaiva to stand up and say, I'm your enemy. No, it's not going to say, I'm your enemy. You just shine like the Orain Sof on it. It's going to run under the rocks. It no longer has the power to actually oppose you, but it's still your opponent. Its opponentness is in a state of fleeing and running away, right? But it's still there because the light is still recognizing the existence of it. Not so when you refine the world by way of true peace, the level of Solomon. That's the idea that the higher one, i.e. the one that's doing the refining, does not go into the land of the enemy. He stays in his place, which means he doesn't even consider that there's an opponent. You're like the last thing on my mind. I'm busy running the mamish kingdom of Israel. There's no such thing as the world. What desert, what snakes? Honestly, you don't even exist in my mind. I wouldn't even give you the thought of time of day. So when you're in such a state that you're completely beyond even recognizing the existence of the opponent, it's because the lower one is literally meaningless and non-existent in my mind. And if I can reveal such a light, then the bittul that you make on the lower ones is a total and complete bittul. It's a bittul b'tachlis, because they're not still like holding on to some metzias, because the only reason they can hold on to it is because you're giving that to them because you're recognizing their existence. The second you stop recognizing their existence, and again, this is like really like we were saying before in the class at the end of last week's class, it's like forgiveness, right? If you're in like a fight with somebody, and even if it's like a cold war, and you're like, you know, I'm just gonna do my own thing, but like he's still like literally what they call having real estate in your mind. You're still thinking about him, right? You're never gonna actually get rid of that trauma, right? It's just you can negate the intensity of it. You can sort of chill it out, but as long as you are sort of holding on to some of it, then how much can you get rid of it if you're the one who's responsible for holding on to it? Like true forgiveness. And just like completely letting go to the point that like literally that does not matter to you anymore. You've turned your life into such another direction that all those things that used to hold you down and make you feel jealous and hurt and you don't feel them at all. Because it's like the best revenge you could get on your enemy is that he's just not, you don't even care. You're doing something else entirely. He doesn't even like play on the board. You're so busy with like running your new kingdom that you don't forgot his name. Right? That's the true level of basically total refinement, and in our case, total healing, right? Because it's you've negated the existence of the opponent inside of you entirely. So long as you're holding on, he's also holding on to you. And therefore, you're not able to totally uproot it and get rid of it. We have our therapists here to concur. All right, there's still a higher level. There's still a higher level, because this is all atik. We didn't talk about panemius atik, right? Which is the ultimate therapy. All right, so anyway.
Wait, how are you saying it's all atik? What do you mean?
Shlomo's level is atik. Atik is a shirus, wealth which is beyond the world. We're talking about a light which is infinite, where it doesn't take the world into account. That is the definition of atik.
The light. Wait, can you say that again?
I don't think so. It's kind of like I just said that.
Like
Perfect.
Like wait. Perfect. What do you mean?
Yeah. What do you mean? What do I mean? We're talking about it the whole time here, right? There's levels of light that are relevant to the world, where the world exists in its source, right? And there's levels of light of Hashem where he didn't even think about the world yet. That's called the panemius of Kesser, Atik. And at that level, Hashem has not thought of the world yet. He's alone. And therefore, if the world should ever come in contact with such a light, it would make the world not be, because in the place of that light, there literally is no world.
But isn't atik also? Isn't atik also? Oh, that's atik or
Atik.
Yeah.
Atik.
Is it also a sphere though?
Not exactly.
It's
Okay, we're going to go on in the mimer. Yesh shlomer ba'omek yoser. We're going deeper, the Rebbe says. The gam kashabiruhu ba'ofen shamavarerhu bimkomo. Even if we're going to refine the world in such a way like Solomon, where the refiner stays in his place. No, I'm sorry. This is going to be like Moshe. Elashu bedarge kazusha mizbarer yesh lo tefisus makom legabe. So the refiner stays in his place, but the enemy, so to speak, takes place in his mind. Why is that like Moshe? Even though we say Moshe went into the place of the enemy, in a certain sense we say he didn't, because he didn't actually encloak himself into the enemy, right? So the ark refined not by going into the snakes, just by shining light above it. So we're saying that even when the refiner stays in his place, right? But he's at a level where he's still recognizing the existence of the enemy. Habito da menagid eino bito betachlis. Right? As we said, the negation of the opponent is not total and thorough. Accordingly, we can add an explanation, which it seems to imply in the Maimer, this that Shlomo was called a man of peace. We said it's because in his days the moon was full, i.e. there was 15 generations, like a full moon from Avram until him, which we call Ashirus, the fullness of the moon, means everything's coming into Malchus that's possible. It's rich, like the moon is Malchus, and when it's full, it means everything's coming into the state of rich, which is even higher than filling its lack. Because the true concept of peace, it's when the opponent is completely negated, right? You don't really have peace if your opponent is merely scattered and running, because he's still out there lurking. In order that your opponent should be completely negated, as we said, it's only by grabbing up to that atik level, the level of wealth, the light that doesn't even consider the creation. Or Ein Sof a light which is Or Ein Sof, which is even higher than any connection to the world at all, i.e. Atik. The Be'ora Shaykh La'olamos, when it comes to the light which is relevant to the worlds, including the Sovev, which is what you were saying before, Sovev Keser, right? Even though it's Keser and it's officially beyond the world, there's an aspect of Keser, i.e. Arech Anpin, the lower part of Keser, which is the source of all the worlds, so it still has a connection to them. Since this light gives room and place for worlds, Olam Milashan Helam Vehester, it only doesn't give place for world. The word world also means concealment, so it allows for the concept of concealment. It's allowing for the enemy. Therefore, the bittul of the enemy, Sheba'olam Agdegile or Zed, how much can the enemy be nullified with a revelation of this light? It's not bittul b'tach, it's not an ultimate bittul. This that Shlomo was truly a man of peace, and there was peace in his days, it's because in his days he had the Hamshacha of Atik, total wealth, and therefore the enemy was negated through and through. We basically did say that. So when he was saying we're adding something, we already sort of added it. That's the idea of Os Tes. Everybody on board? Any questions? For real, any questions at this point on the content of the actual mimer? Good. So Yud. Mamshich ba mimer. He continues in the mimer. Who's continuing in what mimer? The Rebbe Rashab, right, wrote a mimer, and the Rebbe is every single chapter he's deepening our understanding of it. So he says, the Rebbe Rashab continues in his mimer. Now we haven't discussed this yet. What is chesed that's above wealth? We said up until now, if a person was poor and had his needs met, then you give him something called chesed, you make him rich. But now we're saying, in the mitzvah of Gemilus Chasadim, someone who gives chesed can give to poor and rich alike. So what does it mean to give to the rich? That you can give a gamach, a chesed, even to rich. And this Levi is exactly what you were asking about. This level is the revelation of the future, which is higher than even that which was given to Shlomo. Right? So there was a lacking in Shlomo, that's why it fell to pieces, literally. Yes, the level of revelation in Shlomo's day was at the level of Atik, serious business, but in the future we're going to get from the inner dimension of Atik itself. Whoa. Right? The Ein Sof, not the Or Ein Sof, but the Ein Sof that's in what's called Rad La. What's Rad La?
The Reish that is not known.
Nice, man. Reisha de lo yis'ada, right? The unknowable head. So this is basically, as we're going to see, there's three levels of the Kesser now we've discussed, right? There's Arich, Atik, and now Penimius Atik. So those are like what's called the three heads. And the top one, the Penimius of Atik, is called the unknowable head.
Oh, can you say that again?
There's three heads, Arich, Atik, Penimius Atik. In general, when we talk about Kesser, we talk about there's two levels of Kesser, Arich and Atik. But now we're introducing a third level, which is that even in Atik, it's also split into two, external Atik and Penimius Atik. The inner dimension, not of the inner dimension, right? And so that's called the unknowable head of the three heads.
Is that the that's
Shu ikar ha'inyan da'atik. And reality is, that's really what it means when we say atik. All other times we're saying atik, we don't know what we're talking about. The main inyan of atik is the pinimius of atik, which is this unknowable head. And to clarify, based on what it says in the Zohar, in the Idra Zuta, it says, Hai Atika ishtachach betlas reishi. It says this Atik is found in three heads. This notion of Atik, it appears in three different things called heads. Uperesh Rav Chaim Vital. And in his explanation of the Idra Zuta, Rav Chaim Vital, the student of the Arizal, says, She'ikar Atika hua Ein Sof. That what is Atik really? Atik itself is really the Ein Sof, not the Or Ein Sof. We're talking about, we're throwing the word Atik around. Now we're saying there's two levels of Atik. We're saying the main inyan of Atik, right? Now is that it is the Ein Sof itself. Val Shem his al muso begimel reishin nikroim gam hagimel reishim b'shem Atik. And because the Ein Sof gets encloaked, not encloaked is not the right word, but like his al-muso is basically hidden into three heads. Therefore, those three heads are also called by the name Atik. So this is what we just said now, is that there's three heads, and the higher one is the Panemius Atik. That's not even Atik either. Atik is what is beyond the three heads. It's the Ein Sof Hashem himself. Atik means like the ancient one, right? It's God. And the idea is because God finds himself hidden in three different heads, which is Arich, Atik, and Panemius Atik, so therefore we also call those heads Atik. Even Arich at some level is called Atik, right? All the three levels of the Kesser are called Atik because they hold in some way or another the true Atik, which is the Ein Sof.
Okay, so
His mouth was just like wide open. It was a scene there. Yeah.
okay. Atik, Arach Anpin,
Yeah.
Atik Yomin, and Panemius of Atik.
Yeah. Are all now called Atik?
And they're all.
Why are they called
they're all-
Atik?
They're all Ein Sof. They're not all
No.
Ein Sof.
They're all called Atik because the Ein Sof hides itself in them.
Okay.
Right?
At what point in the Histalstus is then the or Ein Sof?
So also there. In other words, like
I thought Arach Anpin was or Ein Sof.
Arich Anpin is Orin Sof, Atik Yomi is Orin Sof, and Panemius Atik is Orin Sof as well. Right? Everything that comes out of the Ein Sof is the Orin Sof. What we're saying is that in the midst of all that Orin Sof, the Atik itself, which is the essence, finds itself hidden at different degrees inside of those three levels of Orin Sof.
what's
I'm glad you asked that. Did you get what I just said?
Yes.
So the Orin Sof is basically what happens when you like leave the Ein Sof, which is a huge step down. But what we're saying is that happens in three gradients. And in all three gradients of that, the Ein Sof itself is found hidden inside of all those three levels of the Ein Sof. And that's why ultimately they are also called Atik. Usually we associate Atik with being the Ein Sof. We're now learning something new. Atik is actually beyond the Ein Sof, right? It's just that it finds itself in these levels of the Ein Sof, and therefore we call them Atik as well.
Is there space in Orin Sof?
No.
And is it like
You can see it. Only you can see
it's not a real light, right?
It's not a physical light.
It's like and
It's
so-
just a metaphor. Light is a metaphor for what it is.
And so how do you like imagine Ein Sof then? Like it's no analogy, like when you like do
You can only imagine it by way of negation. You cannot actually have it in your mind. Your mind can only come up with finite structures and forms. So only thing you can do is negate those structures and forms and say it's not this, right? You can't actually think of infinity in a direct way.
So is it possible to say that Ein Sof is hidden within the gradients, the three heads?
Yes.
Where they have,
And that's why they're called Atik as well.
but where they have what? Like they don't have form. They don't have like what are like what? They have.
He'll
what?
figure it out.
All right, you said it perfectly. You said they only have what?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
right.
Exactly.
Anyway, Al Pi Zeh, come, we have 5 minutes. Let's see if we can get a few more juicy tidbits in. Al Pi Zeh, Iker Atika, who Ein Sof shebechol gimel hareshin. Therefore, what is Atik really? It's the Ein Sof that's found in these three heads. Aval b'maimer ze mevar sheikra in the atik hu ein so sheberadla. So according to what we just said, according to the Reb Chaim Vital, he tells us that the atik is found in all three of these heads. But according to the Maimer of the Rebbe Rashab, he wants to tell us that the Iker Inyan of Atik is in the Radla, which is the unknowable first of the three heads. Okay? So that's a little bit of something that has to be resolved between Reb Chaim Vital and the Rebbe Rashab, right? The Rebbe Rashab is saying that Atik is found, so to speak, in all of these three heads, right? Whereas the Rebbe Rashab is saying that the Iker of Atik is in the Radla specifically, the Reisha de lo Yisyada, the unknowable highest head. We can explain this according to what it says in the Rebbe Rashab's Maimer, as he continues, where he himself brings up what Rav Chaim Vital says in that very explanation of the Idra Zuta, right? So in other words, the Rebbe Rashab himself basically discusses the Rav Chaim Vital's concept, and so that will help us understand how these things resolve. Where he writes there that Sham Nimtzo Misal Mizgal B'Gimeration. Okay, this is an important three languages, three Lashonos. The Chaim Vital says that the Atik is found, Nimtza, Misalem, hidden, Umizgala, and revealed in three heads. Right? So that's his Kabbalistic language of explaining how the Ein Sof finds itself in these three places, and they're all called Atik. It's called Nimtza, Nisalem, Umizgale, right? In three heads. And says the Rebbe, Shegimel Lashonos, these three languages are not accidental. Nimtza, Misalem, Mizgale, that level of found, hidden, and revealed, they are basically what's going on in each three of the heads, right? The Atik is found in the first head, it's hidden in the second head, and it's revealed in the third head. And he wants to say that that's like a language of Kabbalah, and we have a conversation. We have a similar language like that in Chassidus, where we talk about the idea of Va'atahu Havaya, right?
So is Atik Yomin found, Panemius of Atik hidden, and the Aracham revealed?
Yes. Right? And we're saying that these three languages, Nimtza, Misala, Mizgala, they're like the three inyanim that we say, Atahu Vahavaya. Three levels that we talk about in Chassidus. You are he who is Havaya. Right? So Atahu Hashem is also three levels. Nimtza hu kamo Ata. When it says he's found, that's like when we say you, which is represents the Atzmus itself. Misalem, when we say the Atzmus itself, by the way, we're still talking about the first head. So there is something called the Atzmus, which is beyond all three heads. When it's Nimtza, it's talking about in the unknowable first head. We also call that you because it's the Atzmus, because the way that the Ein Sof is found in the Panemius of Atik, in the first head, is that it's there mamish. Like, in other words, it's a direct expression of it. It's found, the thing that's called Ein Sof, it's found in the first head. So it's called you, just referring to God himself. Even though it is already somewhat of an extension, because it's the Ein Sof as it's found in the first head, but we call it the Atzmus. Mis'alum misgalehem k'mohu v'havaya, and then when it says hidden and revealed, that's like the words him who is God, hu and havaya, which are both two levels of light. Right? In other words, that's where the Or Ein Sof really gets started. Right? In other words, because now you're going to have Sovev light, and the Sovev light itself is in two levels. There's a Sovev which is completely beyond the worlds, and there's a Sovev which has some shaykhs to the worlds. What we usually call Atik and Arich, right? We're now calling them the two lower levels of Atik, right? Which is basically Hu and Havaya, or another way you could say it is Nis'alem u'Mizgalem, hidden and revealed. There are two levels of light. So the first level of the Reisha de lo Yisyada, the unknowable head, is the Atzmus Mamish, as it comes like sort of somehow out, but it's not yet light. And the next two levels, which we previously were calling Arich and Atik, we're now calling them either Havaya and Hu, or Misgala and Misalim, right? Which is two levels of light.
Right, would it make sense to say like the Reisha, the rest we don't know is like Atmos, Ein Sof, and the two lower levels would be like Ein Sof?
Ein Sof? No.
Ein Sof.
Oh, Atzmus Or Ein Sof and Or Ein Sof.
And the two lower levels would be orange stuff, like the.
I'm not opposed to saying such a thing, but he here just calls it Atzmus, and he says the lower two levels are called light.
I'm saying because since it has it has like a shaykhis to big having shaykhis, you know, it has like.
Well, it comes out to some degree, right? But it's still Ata, right? Ata is like you. It's not something about you, which would be when I call you him, which is already like some descriptive or even Havaya, full on descriptiveness. Yud Kei Vav Kei, the spheros already, right? It's just you. So the chiddush here is that the atzmos can like come out and be found. It's not just like sort of tucked away.
Right, but that's the Rebbe says that when the attributes can be found in relation to something else, that's like in a way art.
He says it's not called or here. It's that lower than that is called two levels of light. Because I guess but I would still call it the atzmus ha'or, which means it's not light that has shined in any capacity, not even to itself. It's just the ability for light to shine, right? Versus when the light shines to himself, that's Or Ein Sof, that's the Ma'alim Mina Olamos, and then the light shines to himself for the sake of the worlds, that's Or Ein Sof, which is Shaykhus to the Olamos.
These are the 3 levels.
Yeah, those are the 3 levels.
And I think it lines up here too.
It does.
Wow.
Can you repeat that part again?
That's so beautiful.
There's basically, no, not really. Perush Nimsa, let's just do one more line. What does it mean, nimsa? Shu nimsa kamoshu batzmusu. When it says it's found, it means it's found exactly as it is in the essence. Even though it, so to speak, comes out, it's found there exactly as it is in the essence. V'al pi zeh yesh l'var b'ashkazu ba'maymer she'ikra in the atik hu ein sof the bereshit lo is yada. Now we can understand what the Rebbe Rashab meant when he said that the main inyan of atik is in the first unknowable head, right? Because that's really because what is really called Atik? The Ein Sof, not even the 3 levels. And therefore, if you're going to say that the Ein Sof is found in 3 levels, I'll tell you that the main one is the first one where the actual Ein Sof is found. So therefore, the Rebbe Rashab says that the true level of Atik is in the Ein Sof, the first head, Reisha de Lo Yisyada. Whereas the Chaim Vital said it's found in all 3. But you can see why the Rebbe Rashab wants to say it's mainly found in the first one, because they're all 3 are actually just like name tags for the Ein Sof itself, the Atzmus. And even though it's found in all 3, by the time it gets to the lower 2, it's already sort of turns into light. So therefore the Rebbe Rashab says the main place that it's found is in the higher one, the Reish Lo Yisyada, where it's just found exactly as it is in its source.
The same exact way that is in the
That's what it says, it's Nimtza, Ata.
The only difference is that it has relation to like.
I don't know if you can say it has relation to anything. It's just like, it just comes out. I don't know what it comes out from, but it's in some way expression of the Atzmus. L'hosif, a little bit more. Al pi abir ba'maimer. According to the explanation of the Maimer, the nimtza, the word nimtza, that it's found, which the Ein Sof, as it's found in the unknowable head, Hushu nimtza beradla kamoshu ba'atzmus, so that it's found exactly as it is in its essence. Yesh davar zeh shevi Bshalomo ha'aseh ashirus amisis. What does it mean that in Shlomo's days there was true wealth? Av shelo haya az agilu d'la'asid, even though he didn't have the level of the future days to come. Ki achidish yel'asid lava hu she'az yagilu ha'etzem shel mayim b'chinas hagiluim ve'in hagiluim haya b'mei Shlomo shleimus. It's because the whole idea of the future is that we're going to have a revelation of the essence as it is beyond Gilur. We're going to have a revelation of the Penimius Atik, the Reish Lo Yisyada. Whereas in the days of Shlomo, all we had was the full revelation of light. We had both the level of Misgala and Misalem. We had Havaya and Hu. We had Arich and Atik, which means it was mamish total revelation. But all we had was revelation. We didn't have essence, and therefore it was temporary because revelation can come and go. Whoa. All right, you guys, you're now Kabbalists.